In a culture that believes success comes from working hard and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, one of the biggest lies we tell ourselves and the people around us is, "I'm fine."
Life gets really busy. We pencil in meetings and practices and appointments, and by the weekend, we're frazzled, in overdrive. Someone asks how you're doing, and you say, "I'm fine."
We're surrounded by people day in, day out, but still we find ourselves feeling isolated and alone. But when someone asks, "How are you?" you say, "I'm fine."
In a world that is becoming more and more politically divided, we talk louder and listen less. We unfollow friends on social media and draw divisive lines. It's even difficult to tolerate our own family members, but still we say, "I'm fine."
Sometimes we just check out, physically, mentally, spiritually. We grow tired of religion that doesn't seem to be working and disengage from our faith. Things just seem bland, but we always say, "I'm fine." But are we really? At what point will we admit that "I'm fine" really isn't fine?
I'm fine. How many of you have heard that from a parent or a boss or maybe even a spouse? How many of you know that when you hear the words "I'm fine," that you should run for the hills because things are really not fine? Some of you some of you are hearing this and like the alarm bells are going off in the back of your mind right now. I totally get it. I'm with you on it. And we're talking about "I'm fine" for the next couple weeks. I was thinking actually about this sermon series as I was mowing recently, and I was kind of getting the lawn taken care of. And I know some of you are people that love to mow the lawn. Some of you, like, your house is the best house in the neighborhood. You're like a maestro with the lawnmower, right? We all envy your lawn. I'm on the other half of people that are envying your lawn, but also wish that you wouldn't set the bar so high so that I look so bad by comparison. I find that when my neighbors mow, that's when I realize, oh, I really have to mow because I didn't realize that it was knee-high until suddenly there's a comparison next to it. Mike and Margie, if you could slow down a little bit, they're my neighbors, I would appreciate that. But I used to really not like mowing. I used to really not like mowing because we got our mower used, and so the blades hadn't really been sharpened, and one of the belts was a little bit the wrong size, and sometimes you had to like crank the wheel just like 35 degrees to the right if you wanted to make it go straight, which means that sometimes it wasn't always the most fun to mow, right? And so I'd be mowing and I'd be trying to keep it straight down the back of the backyard, and that's when I'd be so focused on keeping the wheel turned that I wouldn't notice like the low-hanging branches on the only tree in our entire backyard. Anybody else ever have that experience? It wasn't a fun experience. And I really didn't like mowing until a couple weeks ago. Two of my friends, two of our members here, actually waited till I was out of town, and they kidnapped my lawnmower. And they took it to a tune-up place where they like did some work on it, and they sharpened the blades, and they fixed the belts, and they got the alignment straight. And it was kind of a unique experience. It was a first-time experience last time I mowed because it felt completely different. Last time I mowed, it wasn't something that was frustrating. I didn't have to like get out and push the thing. I wasn't grunting. I wasn't stopping to make repairs. Instead, last time I mowed, it cut like a dream. It cut like it was a brand new mower. For 45 minutes straight, this thing went perfect, and it was easy. And when I got done, I looked around and not only realized how much easier that had been, but I also began to realize how much better my lawn began to look. For the first time, my lawn looked a little bit closer to like the outfield in Kauffman Stadium, everybody's goal, right? And a little bit less like the dugout at Kauffman Stadium, which has kind of been my history. See, before the mower got tuned up, it had been fine, right? Like, it got the job done. I could get the lawn mowed. I might have to stop once or twice in the middle and shift something. I might have to fix something a little bit. There might be some frustration, but I always got the lawn mowed, right? And there would be a few bumpy spots. There might be a few bare patches, but it was okay. It was fine. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until the first time I got to mow with a freshly tuned up lawnmower and realized just how much better things could be. I didn't realize how bad things had become until I realized how better they could be. And I think that's sometimes how things go in our lives. where we're going through life. And we've got things that are happening and like they're fine, right? They're fine. Until we have something put them into sharp relief and we realize just how much better they could become. For the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some different topics that we have a habit of saying, I'm fine, or it's fine, where things might not really be fine. We're going to talk about our relationships and our friendships and our families and just how we relate to those around us. We're going to talk about the divisions in our society and how sometimes it feels like we're just so quick to anger. And we're going to talk about our relationship with God and sometimes how it feels easier to check out than to dig in. But there are places in our life where we say things are fine, but they might not quite be so fine. One of the reasons we read our scriptures, one of the reasons that we dig into this message that Jesus had, is it holds up to us a picture of what life could look like. It offers us to look at our own lives and see how things are, but also to look at the message of Jesus and the hope of God for how things could be. Like a freshly cut lawn with a brand new lawnmower, it offers us a different perspective, not just on how things are and what's fine, but what they could really be. Now, for many of us, I think, actually, I'm going to guess for most of you, one of the things that is just fine is your calendar. I'm guessing for most of you, one of those things that you say is fine is your schedule. And stop me if this sounds like you, bless you. Stop me if this is not you at all. But I'm guessing that for some of you, you get up like really early, right? Like there's an alarm that gets you out of bed at maybe by 6 you're up, if not earlier. Some of you are here way earlier. Todd, you're up at like 3:30 every morning. Man, I don't even think that's a real time. But some of you are up by 6 a.m. and like then you've got to take care of your body. So you're going to go to the gym or you're going to go for a jog. You're going to take care of like the physical health, and then you've got to shower and grab a quick bite so that you're into the office by, 8 a.m., right? Because you want to impress the boss. You want to be there early. You want to make sure your coworkers know that like you're serious about this. And so you work your 9, 10, maybe 11 hours and you get off and then like you've done your work thing, so now you've got to take care of the family, right? And so you pick up the kids and you drop them off at practice, and while they're doing their thing at practice, then you've got to go, like people got to eat, right? So you've got to go get food for them, and so you've got to either prepare food for them, or if you don't have time for that, maybe pick up food for them, or if it's really a fast day, you've got to order pizza for them, and those are my favorite days, right? But we've got to take care of food for them because we want to take care of our families, and then we're going to have to go back and pick them up and drop them off at home, and maybe drop some of their friends off too, because we want to be a good neighbor, we want to be a good community member, and then we get done with that, and we've got to do our civic responsibility. And so there's community meetings, and there's volunteering, maybe even a church team here, and we've got to do that, and by this point, it's kind of late at night, and you're pretty fried, right? But then you've got to get ready for the next day, and so it's email, and it's checking your schedule, and it's making sure that everything's laid out, and somewhere in there, you've got to do laundry, because you've got to have clothes to wear, and maybe if you're lucky, by the weekend, you'll get to spend time with your family and your spouse, and maybe just collapse in front of the TV and binge watch TV shows because that's all you have energy for. Anybody else ever felt like their schedule is just fine? That's normal anymore. That's just the pace of life. We feel like we're supposed to do everything. And we've got to help all people, and we can't say no to anyone, and so we get busier and busier and busier. And it's good stuff. It's just a lot of it. The number 1 and number 2 most traded commodities on planet Earth right now are crude oil and coffee. The most demand for things out there is for these two things that aren't really, I would argue that coffee is essential for life, but like it's not food, it's not water, it's not clothing. The number 1 and number 2 things most in demand right now are crude oil and coffee, which exist pretty much for the sole purpose, let's be honest, of helping us do other things faster. These are the things that help us stay awake longer, that help us work longer hours, that help us get from point A to point B with more speed. They help us talk faster and finish projects faster and think faster. Crude oil and coffee are the number one and number two most traded commodities on planet Earth, and all they exist for, is to help us keep up that frantic pace. What does that say about us? And I just want to own that I'm doing my part on this. All right, this is not, I'm not just preaching to the choir, I'm preaching to myself here. I am doing my absolute best to make sure that coffee stays at number 2 and probably goes to number 1 on that globally traded commodity scale. Because we live in a productivity-obsessed society. We live in a world that tells us the more you do, the more valuable you are. The more you accomplish, the more we like you. Most of us are stressed. And most of us would love more than anything to have time to rest. There's just no chance, right? What are the consequences to this? I mean, we get overloaded and we get tired, and we know that. But sometimes we miss things. We don't get to spend time with the people we love, doing the things we love. There's a woman in the Bible who gets what it feels like to be overloaded. Her name's Martha. Maybe you've heard of her. She and her sister Mary live in a home together, and one day, this guy named Jesus comes to visit. And it seems like it was kind of an unexpected visit because Martha's kind of bouncing all over the place, getting ready. You can only imagine how much stress having Jesus, like the Savior of the universe, stop by your house unexpected can give. Anybody else getting a little anxiety for Martha right now, right? Jesus just pops in, and so Martha goes into full-on panic mode. She wants to make sure everything's ready, and so she's like, some of you have done this before. She's like smashing clutter into closets and kicking the door shut behind her. Like she's, it kind of smells funky in here, so let's light some candles and cover that up. And like she's got to make a Pinterest perfect meal because this is Jesus, and you got to have something good, right? This is the time that she gets out all those like china plates that you're not allowed to eat off of. Like when Jesus shows up, that's when you're allowed to eat off of them, apparently. But that means that she's got to figure out, like, what is this plate for? What is this thing for? How do we use this? And so she's going from room to room to room, just flying all over the place, full speed, full stress, full throttle, trying to get everything ready. Some of you have experienced that. And while Martha is going from place to place, what's Mary doing? It's just a little line in the scripture. While Martha is running all over the place, being busy and productive, doing the things that we do and think are so valuable, what's Mary doing? She's just sitting there, right? Be honest, how many of you might occasionally be the Martha in your family, and when stuff needs to happen, you're the one, right? Yeah, you're the one going from place to place. Don't raise your hand, but any of you have a Mary in your family? How many of us have ever felt like Martha and family comes in from out of town and you've got to bounce from one room to the next to get everything ready and the kids clean and everything set and just right? Or, the boss's boss comes into the office, or like that one client that you've really got to be on good terms with, and suddenly it's time to like clean off all the clutter on the desk, but also put just enough out strategically so you look busy. Like anybody else ever play that one? Or this happened to me a lot in college. My roommate could always tell when I had a girlfriend coming over for date night, because that's when the room would go from exactly what you would expect from a room of freshman boys to something that screamed like boyfriend material, right? And I could pull that off in like 30 minutes flat, because sometimes we can get super productive when we get stressed, right? We can all get into Martha mode at times. And sometimes that gets us to incredible accomplishment, but the problem is that sometimes we're in Martha mode all the time. Martha's mindset is problematic. She desperately wants Jesus to look at all that she's doing and say that it's good enough, because maybe then Jesus will look at her and say, and you're good enough. Martha desperately wants Jesus and everyone else to see all that she's doing and all the things that are keeping her busy and to think that maybe she has value because of what she can do. I think sometimes we get there, and there's this kind of perverse joy in being the busiest person in the room, right? Because that means that you're indispensable. That means that people need you and that people have to have you. And so sometimes when we get so stressed and overloaded, we still have that tendency to say, I'm fine. I wonder if Martha ever took pride in thinking that Jesus needed her to have things just right. I wonder if Martha ever took pride thinking that Jesus needed her to get the good silverware out and the room clean and everything perfect. But look at the consequences. She's fried, right? I mean, if you asked her how she was doing, I'm sure she'd say, I'm fine, because that's what people have always said throughout history when you ask them how they're doing. But look at what she's actually saying. She's got Jesus, the most important person who's ever lived, not just in her life, but across all of human history. Jesus is sitting in her living room, and she's busy getting everything else ready. And then she finally does go in and talk to him. And out of all the things that she could say and all the things that she could ask and all the conversations they could have, what does she say? She goes in and says, Jesus, don't you care that my sister has left me to prepare the table all by myself? I'm here slaving away, Jesus. I'm Martha, and I'm doing all of the work, and I'm busy, and I'm getting everything ready. Jesus, don't you care that I'm doing all of the work? And my sister Mary is just sitting at your feet. I'm definitely the Martha in this story. Maybe you are too. But I think this is actually where the story begins to hinge. Sometimes we read that Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, and I kind of imagine actually like our kids' time here, where Jesus is sitting there teaching a story, and Mary is kind of there like just soaking it in. Or maybe sometimes we think that Mary is just kind of lazy, and Martha's the hard worker, and she's enabling Mary to be kind of slothful. Sometimes it's easy to think that. I've actually heard it said, and I get how they get there, but I've heard it said that this is like justification, that men should be teachers and women should just sit silently because Jesus was teaching and Mary was sitting silently. And I kind of understand how people can get there. It's wrong. Carissa liked that. Let's put it out there. So in ancient Palestine, when a teacher was going to teach, they would sit down. In ancient Palestine, teachers were often a little bit elderly, and so they would sit down to teach because they would teach for long periods of time, and everybody would gather around them. This is before, mics and PA systems, and so everybody would gather around, and they'd kind of stand, but if you were in the front, you would have to sit down. Right, and if you were in the front, it was because you were closest to the teacher, not just physical proximity, but also in terms of how much you wanted to follow their message. And the people at the very front, the people who were sitting at the master's feet, were the people who were seeking to follow the master and who the master said, you can do what I do. The disciples sat at Jesus' feet. When Paul, the great apostle, talks about learning from Gamaliel, the guy who teaches him to be a great teacher, he says, I sat at his feet. Sitting at someone's feet is saying, not only did I show up to their lecture, but I was personally mentored, and they passed on the torch to me. When Jesus looks at Mary, and Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, this isn't Jesus patting her on the head and saying, don't worry your pretty little head, I'll do the thinking, and you just sit there. This is Jesus looking at her and saying, hey, I see you. And there is value in you. And I believe that you can do what I do. Here's how you do it. In the first century, women didn't sit at a rabbi's feet until Jesus. This is radical first century feminism. And it's also a life-altering recognition. Jesus looks at Mary, and she's not the candidate most of us would pick for most likely to succeed, right? I mean, Martha's the one who's busy and has the resume and has 42 things on her college application, and she's the one who's doing everything. And Jesus looks not at Martha, the one who's busy. Instead, Jesus looks at Mary and says, hey, you, sit at my feet. She's done nothing to deserve praise. Mary's just sat there. It's driving Martha crazy, and Jesus has to pause and say, hey, Martha, hold up a sec. This is Luke 10:41. Jesus calls it out. It says, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. Choose the better thing. Don't let anything distract you from the one thing that means everything. Put the first things first, and the rest is going to fall into place. Martha believes that Jesus is going to see her differently and better if she just does more. That Jesus is going to value her if she can do valuable things with her time. And sometimes we kind of fall into that Martha mindset. And we get overloaded doing thing after thing, hoping that we'll create value for our lives. Mary sits there and looks into the face of the one who made her. And he looks at her in the eye and says, I made you and I love you. Not because of what you've done or how much you will accomplish, but because I gave you worth to begin with. The better thing, the one necessary thing that Jesus calls us to in the first place is to rest in Jesus. It doesn't mean that the other stuff is bad. It doesn't mean that we never do anything else. We just sit here like monks and pray all day. But it does mean that first and foremost at our core, our value is grounded in this. Jesus doesn't see you as better if you achieve more or worse if you achieve less. Your identity is not going to be based on your productivity. It doesn't fluctuate with the amount of hours that you can work. Martha sees all the things she needs to get done before she has value. Mary looks at the face of the one who gives her value. Sometimes in church we talk about how we can pursue our walk with God, and some of that means getting rid of all the stuff that's bad in our lives. Anger and addiction and all the stuff that we call sin. And sometimes that's what we've got to do to get rid of the stuff that drowns out God's voice in our lives. But sometimes it's not the bad stuff. I think for most of us, the thing that threatens to drown out God's voice is the good stuff that there's just too much of. So does that mean that we just sit in the presence of Jesus? Does that mean that we never ever do anything else, and you're not going to feed the kids, and you're not going to wash your car, and you're not going to show up to work? Does that mean that our existence is supposed to be just sitting in church and like mumbling prayers for the rest of our lives? Of course not. But it does mean that first and foremost, our value comes from the value that Jesus gives to us. Now, let's go a little deeper a moment. Because for some of you, it's tempting to say that maybe this doesn't apply to you. Maybe stress isn't something that you struggle with. Maybe your calendar's not overloaded. Maybe it's good stuff. I can justify all of my stress. I work in the church. I can look at my schedule and my calendar and say, all of that's good stuff. All of that I need to do. Maybe that's where you're at too. Maybe our stress is good, and down the road, our kids or our loved ones are going to be happy that we skipped bedtime stories to build a bigger bank account. Maybe down the road, we're going to look back and say, I'm really glad I went to that extra meeting, or I'm glad I picked up those extra hours. But maybe not. It's time to be honest with ourselves, to look at the places where we say, I'm fine, and yet things really aren't fine. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life, and life to the full. I don't think he was talking about full calendars. I don't think he was talking about full schedules. Jesus was talking about full hearts, full of love and peace And sometimes that takes a moment of rest. And this is so easy to miss. As soon as you walk out of here, there are going to be things that compete for your attention. We all know this. As soon as we walk out of here, there are going to be things that demand our time, demand our focus. And so before those things begin to take back over, we're going to do something today. I like to normally give tangible takeaways, and today this is it. We're going to have a moment here, and I'm going to invite Kevin forward, where we do nothing but sit. And maybe you're going to pray, maybe you're going to meditate, maybe you're just going to breathe for a moment and realize that your value doesn't come from what you can do. Your value comes from the one who made you. So we're going to take a moment. Kevin's going to play a little bit of music. The words are not going to be on the screens because your job is not to sing. Your job is to realize that though we live in a world that has this constant, all-encompassing Martha mindset, that sometimes we need to take a break for a Mary moment. And so as Kevin begins to play, I invite you now. Close your eyes or keep them open. It's your call. But remember that the God who made you and the God who loves you is the God who gives value to you. Not anything that you've done, anything that you've earned, anything that you can say you deserve, but instead that your value comes from the one who first and always and forever will love you. Take a moment. I invite you to keep your eyes closed or go ahead and close them as we move into a time of prayer. Almighty God, we thank you that you made us and that you love us and that our value comes from you and not from the things that we do. And God, we know that we've got things that we are called to do and things that you made us to do. And God, we ask for help and strength there, but we also ask for wisdom to know when we're being too much like Martha and not enough like Mary. And God, to remember that you call us and you're the one who gives worth to us. So God, today we want to chase after you. To remember to take time to breathe, to take time to look deeply in your face and realize how deep is your love for us. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.